the same table with you. Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup, our hour-long special this evening. I'm David Stevenson, and with me I have two very esteemed guests. Marty Heiser, who has his own hour-long show Thursday night, 9 p.m. Great show, a lot of good discussion. And Michael Zacchea, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, who's been on my show a few times and talked a bit about his experiences in Iraq and the fine work that he does counseling other Marine. Is it strictly Marine, or is it
all veterans?
All veterans who have suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to divide the hour into roughly into two segments tonight. We're going to talk about domestic social issues, including not limited to, but including the treatment of our veterans. And the treatment of all wonderful groups that make up this quilt we call America. We understand that sometime within the next 10 or 20 years, Caucasians will join the group of minorities in America. And they'll be less than 50%. Of course, they'll still be by far the largest of the minorities. But we're going to talk about balancing things so that everyone, every group, every wonderful group that makes up this great country gets a fair share, gets a fair shake. The second topic of discussion will be the economic issues that America faces. And Marty and I have had some great discussions about that in the past. I'm just going to say quickly that Marty and I agreed on the fact that America had a horrible experience in August of 2008. The economy suffered incredibly from what happened in August of 2008, basically a meltdown. We agree that in January 2009, President Obama inherited a very, very rough economy, very difficult economic situation, and that looking forward to 2014, we are doing as a country financially much better. Could always be better. We always envision ways that we could do things better, but that the country as a whole economically is in far better condition than it was back in January of 2009. Michael, I'm going to let you start off and talk about veterans, and give us a brief synopsis from the other shows of what your position is with what your goal and what your job is in working with veterans.
Sure. So thank you, Dave. So I run a program at the University of Connecticut called the Entrepreneur Boot Camp for Veteran Disabilities, and I help veterans start businesses. So in the last 4 years, we've started 60 businesses. Recently, I have just started the Connecticut Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Nationwide, there are more than 3.6 million veteran-owned businesses that account for about $2 trillion worth of GDP. In the state of Connecticut, there are more than 42,000 veteran-owned businesses that account for about $20 billion worth of GDP. It's about 8% of the state's gross domestic product. So they've never been organized into any semblance of a political constituency, and that's what we're trying to do, so that veteran-owned and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses have representation in the Connecticut General Assembly and to the Connecticut Executive and to the 169 municipalities in the state. I was just at a conference at Syracuse University at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families, and they had just come from a conference with Michelle Obama and Jill Biden when they announced their jobs initiative for veterans. The White House is planning on attrition for the military. You may have seen that Secretary Hagel said that the military is going to downsize to its smallest size since before World War II. The White House now, the planning that they're doing, the military is going to attrit 320,000 people a year every year from fiscal year 2015 through fiscal year 2020 inclusive. So that's about 1.9 million people over a period of 6 years inclusive. And what that means is and they're going to replace them at half rate. So if every 2 people get out, 1 person is going to go back in, and that's how they're going to draw down the military. So on a large scale, we need to find something to do with these veterans. Either, the 4 basic parts to reintegration are access to mental health care, physical health care as well, access to education opportunities, access to workforce reentry opportunities, and access to safe, secure, stable housing. Here locally in Connecticut, that is our value proposition to everybody, to the politicians, to the not-for-profits, and to our for-profit partners. And the sense of urgency that we have is that we will be getting about 1% of that 1.9 million veterans coming back to Connecticut. So that's about 19,000 veterans in 6 years. That is much more. That's more than twice the number of veterans that we, in a similar period, that we have gotten for the last 20 years. And it's going to overwhelm our systems, our state systems, and our ability to handle them. The other part of that is that Connecticut's economy, since 1992, has had only 2 years that it's had positive job growth. It's had negative net job growth in, I think, 22 of the last 24 years. But it's had a steady stream of veterans returning to Connecticut, and that's why Connecticut has the 8th worst veteran unemployment rate in the state. Now we're facing a crisis as the number of veterans coming back to the state is going to skyrocket, and we're still not producing the number of jobs that we need to absorb them. So that's where the real sense of urgency comes in, and that's why we want to help veterans start businesses, and that's why we want to organize veteran-owned businesses in the state.
Now, we've talked historically about how America treats its veterans, and the history has always been a very sad one. Going back to Hooverville.
Going back even further than that.
Civil War veterans.
Well, even the Revolutionary War, the first commander-in-chief, that was a big fight as well, if you read the history. George Washington actually wrote in a letter to the first governor of Connecticut. Connecticut then, the Revolutionary War, was sort of the breadbasket of the supply depot for the Revolutionary Army. Mm-hmm. And General Washington said, "I implore you, sir, to give every consideration to these veteran troops, to satisfy every demand as may reasonably be requested by these veteran troops who have been so faithful in every distress." And really, I think that was the beginning of how our nation deals with veterans. So the veterans of the first Revolutionary War basically got a pension. They got, I think it was $80, and they got, I think it was 60 acres, and that's what they got for fighting in the war, and they became landsteaders, landowners, mm-hmm. which was a big deal then, because basically that meant that they were enfranchised. They had the right to vote. They became people of substance in their community because suddenly they were landed. There was very little in the subsequent wars, in the War of 1812, in the Mexican-American War, in the Civil War, which was a national cataclysm. That was Abraham Lincoln started basically this concept of the Civil War, the veterans' homes, and the first in Connecticut we had the first veterans' home here in Connecticut, and that was the famous quote from President Lincoln, that we will care for him who was born in the war, his widow, and his orphan. But after that, we had the Spanish-American War. Those veterans were given a bonus. We had World War I. Those veterans were given a bonus, but that bonus was in the form of a bond that did not mature for 20 years. And that's what prompted the Hooverville, because after the crash of 1929, in 1931, all these veterans came, and they were out of work, and they said, "Hey, we have this worthless bond. We don't know if the bond is going to be any good in 10 years, or if we're going to be alive then. We want our money now." And there were 50,000 of them on the plaza across from the White House, and Herbert Hoover basically sicked 2 regiments and there were deaths
led by Douglas MacArthur.
Yes,
and
George Patton.
And Patton and Eisenhower was an understudy of Douglas MacArthur.
That is the truth.
Interesting.
That is
I don't think Eisenhower was
not maybe their finest hour. But
I don't think Eisenhower was nearly as directly involved as Patton and.
He was right there. He was an officer under MacArthur. But anyways, he was.
But he was junior because he was still lieutenant colonel at the beginning of World War II. But there were deaths involved.
They burned them out. They burned them out and rolled tanks on their own veterans.
And then it was not until World War, and actually the Servicemen's Readjustment Act in Roosevelt started thinking about very early on. When we began the war, he started working on the Servicemen's Readjustment Act in 1942 because he did not want what happened with Hoover to happen with him. So he said, they had an entire program for what we were going to do with all these veterans. And at the time, nobody knew that it was going to be as gigantic a war as it was.
No.
It wound up being 15 million Americans in uniform serving. That's why they had this, huge, really social economic program for veterans that became arguably the most successful government program in our nation's history.
And that morphed into the GI Bill too, right?
That was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, yes.
Yeah.
And that had historically, people have analyzed this, had a return of $7 for every dollar spent on the GI Bill.
The amounts of advanced degrees with these men coming back from these world wars was just incredible. And it's captured best in Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation.
Right.
And you see, that these men that won our freedom, that stamped out Nazism in far-off battlefields, came back and just made incredible use of their lives.
Economists now who study this make the argument that this is basically what created the middle class and the period of prosperity from the 1950s and 1960s until the 1970s, and then you have the runaway inflation and stagflation in the 1970s. But that period of 20 years of economic prosperity starting in the 1950s as a result of all these veterans who got back in 1945. Get out. They go to college on the GI Bill. They get out. They first start getting their jobs in 1949 or so, entering the economy, and the economy just explodes after that.
It's impressive.
Now, for some reason, our nation seems not to have learned, or seems to have forgotten that lesson. So, Vietnam, there's been a continual watering down of GI Bill benefits, a continuing watering down of veterans benefits. Even in this generation of combat veterans, they have now the post 9/11 GI Bill, which is the most generous veterans GI Bill since the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. But for some reason, it has been opposed by, believe it or not, the Republicans have opposed it at every turn. The Republicans have opposed every veterans hiring bill that has come up, and they actually just killed the Veterans Omnibus Bill in March that was sponsored by, created by Senator Sanders, but co-sponsored by Senators Blumenthal and Murphy. So, unfortunately, what did not used to be politicized has now become very partisan.
Well, my Republican Party, and I'm an Eisenhower Republican, has been greatly damaged by taking on these former Dixiecrats who we got rid of when President Johnson signed the civil rights legislation, and these folks that have evolved into the Tea Party, and they're the ones that are poisoning the Republican Party, in my opinion, and making it impossible for moderate Republicans to get anything done. They're worried about this small group which is beating them up at every turn. And now they turn on a guy like Lindsey Graham, of all people, who's as conservative can be, but to the Tea Party folks in South Carolina, he's a raving lunatic communist.
And he's a veteran, too. He's a colonel in the Air Force Reserve, and he's served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But what they're missing is that this is really about getting veterans back into the workforce and getting them into the community. And for some reason, they're missing the larger picture. And ostensibly, if you had veterans who were business owners or who were getting into good jobs and who were homeowners, for the Republican economic agenda, that seems to me that would attract those sorts of people. But instead, they're making very short-term political calculus to oppose these programs. And we know, historically, we have the data that these programs produce tremendous returns on investment over time.
And government does do great things. Now, look at the GI Bill. I mean, when government invests money, it obviously some of it goes to waste. Like any large corporation investing money, some of it goes to waste. But when government invests money in programs to employ people, the return, as you mentioned in the GI Bill, $7 for every dollar invested. The return is immense, and it's the right thing to do.
I agree. I was unaware that Republicans were somehow standing in the way of some of these benefit programs for veterans.
It's crazy. The crazy side of the party.
People who pay attention to this.
But I just want to say it's an honor to be at the same table with you. We were talking a little bit before, and I don't know if the viewing audience knows, but you're a combat veteran, a Marine who fought in Fallujah. And Fallujah will go down along with Gettysburg, the Battle of the Bulge, Hue City in Vietnam as one of the most intense combat encounters of the American armed forces in the history of our country. So I just want to, I consider it an honor to just be in the same table, round table with you. Really, very incredible. I appreciate very much your work, what you did, and your service. It's just, it's really incredible. I couldn't agree more that we need to support our troops. I think the veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan were subject to conflict and combat on a more extended period of time, and there were very few safe areas, the type of warfare that you were subject to when you're dealing with insurgents and you never know who was friend or foe. These weren't pitched battles that took place out on the field, during the months of July and August, and then everyone went back to their camp. Every time you went outside the wire, you were subject to enemy fire, and it's just incredible. I know a little bit about this. My son's in the military, and he went to a military school, and so I've gotten to know some of what they've gone through, especially the post-traumatic stress. We had on our show, we were talking earlier about a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, Captain Bud Buka. He actually lives in Ridgefield, won the Congressional Medal of Honor for combat he experienced and led in Vietnam. But some of the issues that these veterans in particular are facing, and you got to understand, and you'll know this better than I because you have these statistics now, but it's less than 1% of our society are even involved in the military, and of that 1%, a very small percentage are actually combat veterans who actually have seen combat. And we just have to do whatever we can. That's why the most recent thing that's going on right now with the VA hospital and everything like that, and you could do a whole show just on that. It's just a national scandal.
There have been scandals at the VA hospital going back into like 2005, 2006, where they went in there and they found that paint peeling off the walls and all kinds of crazy.
It's interesting you mention that because what you're talking about is Walter Reed, and Walter Reed is right outside of Washington, and the previous president, I forget his name because it was so long ago, But he went in there, he kicked ass, took names, fired guys, replaced them, and went down there personally and addressed it and got it turned around right away. For such a leader as that at a time like this, where we have actually military men that are dying because they're being lied to about when they had medical appointments and everything else. I think it's a stark contrast.
That's an ongoing thing, and I think Michael can attest to that. That's an ongoing thing for generations and generations and generations. The movie The Best Years of Our Lives, which is one of my personal favorites, where a group of soldiers come back from combat in World War II, and this happens over and over and over again. They come back and everybody greets them and says, "Thank you for your service." Now, we don't want to see your disabilities. We don't want to see the man with the metal arm. We don't want to see the guy who cries himself constantly to sleep because of what he's seen in combat. We don't want to deal with that. This is a recurring theme throughout American history.
I couldn't disagree with you more. What we're dealing with right now at the VA hospitals has nothing to do with not wanting to see amputated limbs. It has to do with crass incompetence from this administration.
It fits the same. You can
say, "Oh, Bush did it too," or something like that. That makes no.
They all. It's happened throughout every war.
That's ridiculous. I'm telling you, we have a problem now.
Can I inject some?
Yes.
He's got his bell. He should start.
All right. So. I'm on the board of directors of a national veterans advocacy group. It's a VA policy watchdog group called Veterans for Common Sense. You can look it up, www.veteransforcommonsense.org. We sued the VA in 2007 over giving veterans access to health care for exactly the same reason. And we found and uncovered and entered into evidence a number of memoranda from VA executives that were addressing exactly this access issue. We also found evidence of the Undersecretary of Mental Health, Dr. Ira Katz, who materially misrepresented the number of veteran suicides to the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. He said by a factor of 1,000. So we won our case in federal court in the Ninth Circuit. The federal government appealed, and we went to the Supreme Court, and we lost on appeal in the Supreme Court. But the VA was forced to make a number of substantial or substantive changes. But these issues resurfaced back in 2007, and obviously VA has not made sufficient progress in addressing this, but the problem of access to health care has been ongoing since at least, we sued in 2007, but it's been going on since at least 2005, 2006 timeframe, and it's not gotten any better.
I won't even get into how that's a single-payer health care program. That's a microcosm of what the Democrats want to see brought on the whole country, where you have the government run the whole thing. This is a rather, small portion of the health insurance, health policy, health program, and it's completely screwed up by the government to where we have these veterans that need care that are being denied it, and it's being all papered over. And we want to have a single-payer health care system for the whole country.
It's interesting because right now there are far fewer veterans than there have been in the past, and the VA has not had these management problems in the past, and that's the mystery, is why now the wheels have come off. Because if you talk to older vets, many are very happy. Okay. And I talk to a number of vets, and many are very happy with the actual health care that they get. What seems to be the problem is access, which I think is the problem with our healthcare system at large, is access, which is, that 50 million Americans don't have access to healthcare. It's not necessarily the quality of healthcare, but the access to healthcare. So,
if you don't have access, the quality is rather moot, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly.
You can have the greatest MRI and surgeons ready to go, but if you don't have access, what does it matter?
This is interesting because what the Ninth Circuit said, and we set precedent when we did it. This Ninth Circuit said that the VA denying access to health care for veterans was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, an unconstitutional appropriation of property without due process, because by right of service, veterans own access to that health care, to the VA. And the VA denying it is a violation of their constitutional rights. And so this goes back to what you were saying about the way our country has traditionally treated veterans. And right now, many veterans feel that they've been betrayed. Their relationship with the federal government is in many ways manifest in their relationship with the VA.
You know a lot about returning veterans. It seems like you know this chapter and verse. I just know it sort of anecdotally, and I come up with the first thing that crosses my mind, and I run with it. That's my, the way my mind thinks. It always isn't the best. But is it true, generally speaking, that when the veterans were returning from the Vietnam War, that generally speaking, the left in this country, did not welcome them back, but they carried the stigma of wearing the uniform and being identified with an unpopular war? And if you grant me that point, fast forward now to these most recent conflicts as a result of 9/11 and where we went in, it seems as if the entire spectrum, left, center, conservatives, have made a concerted effort to welcome back the veterans. So we don't go back to the bad old days where veterans talk about how they didn't want to wear their uniforms walking through an airport.
The first part of what you said is true, but there's a second part to it, and that is that many Vietnam veterans have told me that they're very bitter because the World War II veterans disowned them, would not talk to them, because they said, and I've heard this from many, many Vietnam veterans, they said, we won our war, and they held the Vietnam veterans responsible for not winning theirs.
Wow. I didn't even look at that substrata.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So, on the one hand, you're right, the left did sort of treat badly Vietnam veterans, but many Vietnam veterans are more bitter about the way they were treated by World War II veterans.
Interesting.
In the veteran organizations.
Okay.
I was just at the state convention for the Military Order of the Purple Heart on Saturday, and we were talking about this, and virtually every single Vietnam veteran that was there said that very same thing.
I didn't even think of it in that term.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, speaking briefly from the left, because I've been told that I'm
Eisenhower Republican doesn't sound too left, but we'll go
by modern standards.
If I'm a Reagan Republican and you're an Eisenhower, I guess you're to my left.
By modern standards, Eisenhower, as he was when he was president, a little group called the John Birch Society branded him. They used the term in those days, queer. They don't use that term anymore, but that's what they called him, and they also called him basically a communist. And then these are the kind of folks, these John Birch Society type people that are trying to grab your party, formerly my party, by the tail and swing it around their head.
I have some good news on that.
At midnight.
I have some good news on that front. By all reports I've gotten, these primaries going on, the Tea Party types that run primaries, I think Graham's going to be absolutely fine in South Carolina. So we're not quite having like what we had in Delaware, where there was kind of a Tea Party girl who was a witch or something and didn't pay her mortgage. And if we would have just run the Republican that was,
you would obviously would have had a better chance. Certainly, yeah.
So I think. Yeah. Much to your concern that with the Tea Party taking over and what a terrible thing that is, I think this primary season it's kind of mellowed out of it. There's like some Tea Party guy down in Mississippi that snuck into a old folks home to take a video of the sitting senator's wife or whoever's or something like that. So he's fallen out. So you can rest easy. The Tea Party candidates don't seem to be prevailing in these primaries.
When Republicans can start bravely speaking about being moderate Republicans, like Governor Christie in New Jersey is a good example. Not afraid to say, yes, I am a moderate Republican. When all of the Republicans can boast, yes, I am a moderate Republican, I'll be a lot happier.
Well, I would say that the Republican Party has quite a spectrum, quite a patchwork. There isn't any lockstep uniformity. We're tolerant. We're diverse. We allow a number of different voices in the orchestra to come forward. And so, yeah, you have Chris Christie. You say he's moderate. As far as I'm concerned, he's pro-life. He's anti-teacher union. If that's moderate, sign me up.
No, it was not really anti-teacher union.
Oh, he has to ask the teachers union because they ran TV ads against him.
Yeah, there was a battle that went on there, but I
could go to YouTube videos and see how he talked about the teachers when they were demanding increases.
I think he wasn't quite as harsh. Because he does speak loudly. He does speak loudly.
But the point is, and then you have the governor of Texas who 40%. If you want new jobs, if you want veterans getting new jobs, send them to Texas because 40% of all the new jobs in the countries have been created in Texas.
Well, I just saw something
Rick
about
Perry?
this because
Rick Perry, he's the guy that couldn't remember what the three organizations were.
But what I saw about him is that he just got lured Toyota to Texas.
Okay.
And he's paying 3,000 jobs from California, 1,000 jobs from Kentucky, 4,000 jobs in Texas. So he's hiring Texas people, but people in California and Kentucky are losing their jobs, and he's using taxpayer money to subsidize the move in Texas. So,
have you seen those TV ads for New York? Come work in New York. We're going to give you a 10-year tax holiday.
Tax holiday as opposed, but Texas is actually paying Toyota to.
Well, giving up taxes for 10 years or paying is but the point is, and this is your point about Connecticut, which I didn't even know how bad it was, but you said there's been zero job growth in 22 out of the last 24 years.
That's correct.
Some of which there were Republicans in the governor's mansion, so I won't go there. Of course, the Democrats have run the House. But be that as it may, these companies have freedom to move. Yeah. And when Connecticut is the highest tax, it's been voted the least business-friendly state in the union. You're not going to attract these businesses, and Toyota's going to leave California like a house on fire because they're raising taxes. They've got all these work rules and regulations, and Texas is saying, "Y'all come on down here. We got nothing but prosperity and limited taxes."
I'm working on a project now because now I talk to a lot of business owners, a lot of veteran business owners, and I'm trying to figure out what is the truth because there are more than 42,316 veteran business owners out of a population of about 220,000 veterans. So that's a ratio of about 5 to 1, a little bit better than 5 to 1, like 5.5 to 1, which is one of the best in the nation.
In Connecticut, you're talking
yes.
about? Wow, okay. So 42,000 veteran-owned independent businesses.
Yes.
Great, okay.
Now, that's very fertile ground for veteran-owned businesses in Connecticut. And I'm trying to, and I've heard people say that Connecticut is terrible for businesses and you shouldn't open up a business in Connecticut. But then there are two surveys. One is called the American Dream, or indices. One is called the American Dream Index, and one is called the State Entrepreneurship Index that ranks Connecticut in the top 5 in the nation for starting businesses. So I'm trying to
We'll talk about an educated workforce.
Yeah.
We'll talk about good infrastructure, talk about good transportation networks, things like that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to template that against the veteran population and why, how does the veteran population and these things that go towards starting businesses work to create one of the best veteran to veteran business owned ratios in the country, but we have one of the worst veteran unemployment ratios in the country.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you in general terms, and again, I cite your statistics where there's been zero job growth 22 out of the last 24 years. That's devastating.
Yeah, it is.
You don't got that in Florida. You don't got that in Texas. You don't got that in North Dakota. You don't have that in states that are run by Republicans. I'm just telling you, you don't. You have businesses. You have states that are open for business, and they're growing. This isn't that complicated. It isn't like there's this great, Rubik's Cube that we just can't figure out, but we have these bleeding hearts because we want to help people. Get government off the back of businesses. Lower taxes. Give tax freedoms like New York, because all you got to do is turn on your TV. If you do that and allow the private sector to flourish, it will. When you stifle growth, when you have business, you have all these involvements and laws and regulations. It's anecdotal.
You're,
Well, the key
you're
thing
drawing
we're
the wrong
getting at-
conclusions because we are one of the best states to start a business, but we're
small business.
right. We have negative net job growth. So why is that? Why do we have negative net job growth, but we are one of the best states to start a business?
I can just tell you, these companies that are here, if they're going to, if Perkin-Elmer or Pitney Bowes are going to start an R&D thing,
that's it.
They don't have to start it here. They don't have to. They're not going to start it here. Sure, their corporate headquarters is here because back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, this was a great state. But now it's so business unfriendly. I can give you one example.
That's
You
right.
want one
Corporations
example?
leave, right.
They leave you out of here so fast. Here's a good example. Here's where bleeding heart liberalism that tries to do everything for everyone because they care, really F it up for everyone. Okay? And here we go.
Except for small businesses.
No, especially for small businesses. Bleeding heart liberals say, you know what? When a woman has a baby, she needs time to give birth to the baby and nurture the baby and everything like that. And you know what? Don't we all agree on that? Don't we?
Absolutely.
Birth, motherhood.
Sure.
You need time to nurture the baby, right?
Family values.
Family values. And so guess what? So they pass a law that says if you have an employee that gets pregnant, you have to pay her salary for X number of months while she has the baby and nurses the baby. And by law, you have to have paid maternity leave. That's the law of the state of Connecticut. I had a friend of mine who's in very high up in politics, and he went down to Florida, and he said, hey, I hear you guys passed that maternity pay bill, right? Yep, you did. And he went like this because he knew that businesses were going to be leaving Connecticut and coming down to Florida. Now, here you have bleeding heart liberals that say, oh, we care about you. Oh, we want the best for you. We're going to force these dastardly businesses to pay you while you have your baby and you're on maternity leave. They have to pay. It's the law. Don't you worry. We're here for you. We're going to help them pay. Well, great. You just stifled economic growth in Connecticut because no business is going to say, oh, am I going to set up my business here or am I going to set it up in another more business-friendly state? That's one anecdotal case.
Does that tell you that Florida and Texas and these other more conservative-leaning states are inhumane?
I don't think they're inhumane at all. I think if you have a factory and you're producing coffee mugs and you want to have a job and you say, look, I can afford to pay you $20 an hour to help me make coffee mugs because you're going to produce coffee mugs that cost me $5 to produce and I'm going to sell them for $7 and I'm going to keep $2 and I'm going to make a profit. And if the state comes along and says, okay, Mr. Coffee Mug Factory Maker, you know what? I'm going to decide that I know better about the coffee mug making business, and those people that are making coffee mugs where everybody's agreed to be paid $5 an hour, I'm going to, or whatever, $20 an hour to produce the mug for $5, $20 an hour, I'm going to say that not only do you have to pay them $20 an hour, but you have to now pay them if they take time off for whatever family circumstances that they have. And then the coffee mug guy says, guess what? Now it doesn't cost me $5 to make a coffee mug. Now it costs me $8.50 to make a coffee mug, and I can only sell the coffee mug for $7. This isn't working. Now, is that coffee mug factory guy a bad guy?
I think what
he's not. He's just trying to run a business. That's all. So he's going to take his coffee mug making business the hell out of here.
What does it say that about people that allow people to bring companies, and companies do this all the time. This is not just Connecticut. This is not any state in particular, but a company, particularly large corporations, play state against state. Connecticut will bring them here for 10 years and give them tax rebates and things of that nature, special incentives to come here for 10 years. Guess what happens on the 10th anniversary or a day thereafter? They're gone. This is not moral. States should not be working against one another to try to cut each other's throats.
BS.
Should they?
That's complete BS. We have a wonderful business in Ridgefield, Connecticut, called Boehringer Ingelheim.
Yep.
Of all things, they're a German from Engelheim, Deutschland.
Yep.
They're a German company that, of all things, produce retroactive drugs that have to do with suppressing the AIDS virus. What more noble thing? very wealthy company. We bend over backwards to give them tax incentives because they're building building number 10, and they're putting the shovel in the ground in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And that means for Ridgefield, Connecticut, we're going to have year after year after year after year of tax revenue coming in because they're putting the shovel in the ground. So in our enlightened self-interest, morality has nothing to do with it. We are so happy and want to make it so appealing that they build that next building on our soil because we know that we're going to be benefiting from that, not just in tax revenues, but in the high-paying jobs that come along with it, let alone the moral brilliance of producing drugs that fight AIDS. You know, what a wonderful thing. So don't talk to me about morality, about giving tax abatements to corporations. I think it's a free market. That's what built this country, and we need to put on our big boy pants. And if we're the state of Connecticut, we damn well better compete with New York because they're cleaning our clock. And we have veterans we got to have jobs for, and we have everyone else that's walking around here looking for jobs. And everyone's wringing their hands, coming up with, moral, and let's have fairness, and let's have the government come in and make everything fair. Well, you're fairing yourself right out of a good economy. Because these guys that are producing coffee mugs or making retroactive drugs don't have to stay here, and they won't.
Where do these jobs end up eventually, unfortunately? They don't go from...
In the case of Boehringer Ingelheim, right in England. And they buy nice big houses that you can sell them as a real estate agent and make your commission.
But...
Which is immoral. Why don't you just sell a house? Why do you have to make a commission when you sell a house? Why don't you just, nicely encourage someone to come? Don't you have the sense of value of having someone have a home? Why don't you just put it together? Why do you want to get money?
I love your snarkiness.
I'm not being snarky. This is capitalism. It's not supposed to be, moral.
Hold on. Okay. The point I'm making is, a company goes from state A to state B to state C to state D.
How about country A to country B?
That's what ultimately happens. Because that's what ultimately happens, and it shouldn't be happening that way, except for the fact that we have laws which encourage it. Unfortunately, that encourage it. They encourage. They don't say to companies, you need to act and you need to be American, and you need to act on the part of American citizens.
What I think we should do is have liberal Democrats decide and pass laws that say you can't move your company. You must stay here because the government says you must stay here. And we could call it the Geographical Fairness Act of 2014, where we just feel like we want to have jobs here. So if you want to start a business here, we feel you need to stay here. So we're going to pass a law that says if you don't, we could foreclose on your property or something like that. You're right. That would be a great idea.
Well, here's my question. Are you a business owner?
Yes, I am.
Why are you here?
I have a big mouth, and I like to spout off about stuff.
He doesn't mean here. He doesn't mean here. He means here.
Why am I in Connecticut? My business is painting houses, among other things. I'm a painting contractor. And so of all the places on the planet that have large center hall colonial wood houses that need to be painted, this is probably ground zero for that. And so that's why I chose to live here. I grew up in suburban Chicago. We moved out here.
Seminary school, graduate.
And I went to Wheaton College in Illinois. I got my master's in theology and communication, so I tend to be, highfalutin about stuff. But so in college, a friend of mine moved out here, and he said, hey, why don't we try this painting business out here like we had it in suburban Chicago? And that's where I moved, planted my flag here. My wife saw the main street in Ridgefield, Connecticut. She liked it. So we moved to Connecticut in 1990 and, raised 3 kids here. And I love the state of Connecticut. That's why I want
Kudos to Ridgefield, one of our 3 towns. Bethel, Danbury, and Ridgefield from Comcast. Yeah. But go on.
But anyways, your point is, why do I have a business here if I'm, saying how bad it is and stuff like that? And my answer to that is, I like Connecticut. You got to live somewhere. Ridgefield, Connecticut's a beautiful town, good schools, and probably for all those reasons you cite it's a good place to start a business. That's probably why, I did. And so I'm not taking my bat and ball and going home. I just think that the nutmeg state could do a hell of a lot better, and I think we could do a lot better nationally as well. But I'm going to try to.
So what I get from that is that it's not all about business.
Correct. Yeah, the quality of life, education, things like. I understand there are great jobs in North Dakota, but you're in North Dakota.
Yeah.
So
a lot of jobs being created in North Dakota. If you want to go there, sorry, not going there either. You nor I nor any.
So
no.
I mean, I just that's the way I think. I mean, I grew up. I started a business during the Reagan administration. 1980, 1985. And really, it was a great time to start a business. The economy was roaring. Credit was easy. Banks were loaning money. There was very much this. Government isn't the solution to problems. Government is the problem, and let's get government off the backs of people, and let's let this economy flourish. And it just boomed. I just this past weekend, my daughter graduated from Miami of Ohio in Ohio.
Congratulations!
Yeah, I'm very, very happy. My last child to graduate from college. Well, 2 out of 3. It's a long story, but she's a flight attendant.
That's a good percentage.
So that works out pretty good. It's pretty good batting average. But the point is, these poor college kids are coming out of school now, and it isn't as if jobs are that plentiful. Recent college graduates, it's not that easy, and there isn't this like, ooh, wow, we're entering in this roaring economy and we're hitting the ground running. It's a little nerve-wracking. But anyways,
for parents, it always is. You always worry about your kids when they're coming out of college and. As you say,
like I said, I got one in the middle of that. That guy I worry about quite a bit.
Absolutely.
But anyways, I don't mean to dominate the conversation, and I'm not completely down on Connecticut, but we do have a governor's race coming up now, and frankly, there are no Republicans. The Republicans don't have no majorities in the Senate, no majorities in the House. We have a Democratic governor. I think every single congressman is a Democrat. 2 senators are Democrats. Hey. Throw us a bone here. Maybe
who are you going to endorse? I want an endorsement. Tom Foley.
I have no problem with Tom Foley. I think he would be a great governor. I really do. And if that is the endorsed candidate, I'm fine. I also think Mayor Bowden would be a great governor. And if he is the candidate, I think that would be fine.
John McKinney.
I think John McKinney would be fine, from what I know of him.
My personal favorite of the 3.
Yeah, now, I just think Governor Malloy is a bit of a disaster because of all this, government involvement, raising taxes, raising spending, and I think it's part of the exodus of businesses out of the state.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Zacchea can take us through the scenario because Tom Foley was head of the economic recovery part. What were the 3 portions of recovery in Iraq?
So here's how it worked. So immediately after the invasion of Iraq in March, April of 2003, you had they formed the Coalition Provisional Authority under the authority of Ambassador Bremer. And there were 3 parts to Reconstruction. So there was political reconstruction, economic reconstruction, military reconstruction. So my job, I went there in boots on the ground on March 15th of 2004. I led a team of Marines. We were the first advisors, and we built and trained and led in combat the first Iraqi Army battalion created by the U.S. military. Tom Foley was in charge of economic reconstruction for the CPA, answered to Bremer. If you read the literature about the Iraq War and the history of the Iraq War, there's quite a few books about it. What Mr. Foley or Ambassador Foley did in the immediate aftermath when he took over was really, I believe, created fundamentally the grounds for the insurgency. 4 things happened in May of 2003. One, they disbanded the Iraqi army. Now, this is arguable because I talked to the Iraqi officer. I said, "What did you do after?" He said that the Iraqi officer told me that they were given orders just to go home and await further orders. So that was maybe just a formalization of something that already happened. But nobody secured any of the military facilities, so there were arms all over the place, and everything got looted. The second thing is, and this is what Foley did. They unpegged the dinar from the dollar. So previously, the dinar had been pegged to the dollar 3-to-1. So if you had 3,000 dinars, you could buy $1,000 worth of American goods. Overnight, they unpeg it. It goes to like 2,001. So suddenly, you can buy $1.50's worth of goods. And so everybody in Iraq basically is paupered overnight. The third thing they did was there were 150 Iraqi state-owned companies that had 240, I think it was, factories that made everything in Iraq. And it was a closed economy, and everything. It was a fascist economy. Everything worked on a voucher system. So they fired, and in order to work at any of these factories, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. So part of the Ba'athification process was they fired all the factory workers. So nothing was being made. There was no money moving, and anybody that had any money, it was worthless. Right there, and then what they did was they tried to sell, and eventually they did sell off all the factories, but they were worthless. They sold them for pennies on the dollar. One American company bought one factory for $10,000, ultimately. But it was 3 weeks after they did these things in May of 2003. 3 weeks later was the first bombing in downtown Baghdad at the UN compound, and that was the beginning of the insurgency. I lay that squarely, the responsibility for that squarely on Ambassador Bremer and Ambassador Foley. They had an economic agenda. They didn't know anything about Iraq. They had a plan, and the plan failed miserably, and it's failing to this day.
It sounds like they basically privatized everything. They took everything that was under government control and privatized it and sold it off.
They did that. Unfortunately, the people who bought were basically the Chinese. So, the idea that Wolfowitz had that the Iraqi oil would pay for the war. The only people who had benefited from the wars were the Chinese, who got the contract, the concession to develop the Iraqi oil field, and the Iranians, who now dominate the Iraqi government. Al-Maliki is an Iranian agent who basically Iraq has basically moved into the Iranian sphere. I don't know if you know this, but for people who follow this, and I follow this, and I still talk to Iraqis. I talk to I've helped a number of Iraqis come to the United States. I still talk to Iraqis who are in Turkey, Syria, Oman, and Iraq. 2013, and actually Brookfield. We have another Iraqi family living in Brookfield. Iraq was the most violent year, or 2013 was the most violent year in Iraq since 2006, which was the height of the insurgency. 2014 now is on a pace for the violence to be more violent than 2013 was. Al Qaeda in Iraq retook Fallujah in January of 2014. It's not good.
There's this classic scene in the movie Patton where I think he's riding an Arabian horse in Vienna, I think it was, and this is sort of getting towards the end of World War II, and these journalists are asking him about what are we going to do with Germany after World War II, because the Nazis ran everything. They held everything.
Yeah.
And one of the reporters asked Patton. He said, "Well, being a Nazi, that's just sort of a political party, isn't it? Kind of like being a Democrat." And Patton, he always didn't think through what he was going to say. He answered yes to that. Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. As he rode his horse to Lebanon.
Too busy trying to steer.
So the headline is, Patton calls Nazis just like Democrats. And of course Eisenhower goes nuts. But the point is to what you're talking about with the Ba'ath Party right after the Iraq War. I believe that after World War II, the idea was, okay, you guys were all Nazis. Anyone that had a company that made trucks or delivered Coca-Cola or whatever it was had their allegiance to the Nazi Party. We're gonna, look the other way because we got a country to run here, and you guys all keep your factories and run stuff, and let's keep the military in order. That's the only thing. And what you're describing there is a horrific error in judgment. Yeah. And unfortunately, it cost American blood and lives, what you're saying. Yeah. And I've learned two things tonight. That, what you're saying, and Tom Foley's, fingerprints on that is certainly not his finest hour. If what you're saying is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it. The other thing is that Republicans have blocked these veteran benefits things in Washington. That's an outrage to me. Those are two units of information that I didn't know before.
I will send you the links.
Please do.
We'll exchange information. Yeah. I'll send you the links because I can prove this.
No, I don't doubt what you're saying, and I think that was the aftermath of the Iraq War was a FUBA of epic proportions, and what you're pointing out is Tom Foley, if he was complicit in that, then that's not certainly not.
I believe he was complicit in it.
There may have been good reasons for that, and the only thing I'll say
at the time, right? You don't have foresight, so
and it is kind of the same. And I see the bell coming up, but it is kind of the same after World War II with the denazification.
Well,
what's the best way to manage?
You know why? Because quick last point, and I'll make it. Being the owner of the show.
Yeah. Well, one last thing about that, and as far as the slaughter that ensued, Sunni versus Shia, there was smoldering tribal, and that was unleashed as well, which I'm not sure. If Foley did everything right, that wouldn't have happened.
We're talking essentially about privatizing, about taking things that are functions of the government and privatizing them. And the concern is that if Tom Foley did that to Iraq, is he going to come to Connecticut as governor and try to do the same thing?
And are we going to have completely apples and oranges?
Well, I think that privatization of everything government run has become almost one of the great mantras of at least that side of the Republican Party.
If I got a package and I want to get somewhere, I'm using FedEx, not the U.S. Postal Service. Well, if I know, it absolutely has to be there overnight.
Well, privatization is something that we have to discuss further on future shows.
This went very fast.
Because
I thought this dangerous. Is fascinating. And I really want to say I appreciate it very much. Your service and just listening to what you had to say.
I appreciate that.
We shall. And
do we have a website for him or something so people
can give you all the information.
Sorry.
Yeah. And next time we will have our good friend missing today, Al Robinson, because we wanted him with us. And wherever you are, Al, we'll have you next time.
Yeah, Al, you're gonna bring clips of my show showing me where I was wrong on everything. I want those clips.
And he shall, I'm sure. Good night.